Let's take a look here at the 2019 Micro AP exam. This is from set 2. We're going to start with question number 1. All right, there it is. So this is so Gigantic Pharmaceutical Corporation has a patent on a prescription drug, making it the only manufacturer of that prescription drug. Gigantic is also currently earning a positive economic profit. All right, so part A is going to want us to draw the graph, right? So this should stand out as a situation where we have a monopoly. Okay, so we'll sketch this here down below, I guess. Your standard monopoly graph. So we have price, we have quantity. All right, so we've got a demand curve, we've got the marginal revenue curve, and then we're going to have, and remember, let's draw an average total cost curve, and then marginal cost, something like that. Okay, so profits are maximized where MR equals MC, right? So they want us to label this Q sub G. And to find price in monopoly, you can come all the way up to the demand curve. Come across where these intersect. Over here, so this is P sub G. And we have our, let's see, make sure we did average total cost curve. Yes, we did. And then the marginal cost curve should intersect somewhere near the minimum there. And the way we've drawn this, you can see we satisfied the profit, the fact that it's making economic profits, right? So if you were to calculate profits, you compare the price to the average total cost curve. So you just want to make sure you have the average total cost curve somewhere below. You know, if you had average total cost somewhere up here, then you'd be showing a firm that was making economic losses. So something along these lines would be good. We also have to, so we've got that, we've got that, we've got that. Consumer surplus, shaded completely. Okay, so consumer surplus in monopoly is going to be this top little triangle up here. Again, when you're thinking about consumer surplus, you're thinking about all the people on the demand curve. So you're going to look specifically, start at the demand curve. All the people that would have been willing to pay more, but got essentially a better price, right? So the price was here, P sub G. So you're going to take all these people on this demand curve to that point, come across, and it's that area of that triangle, right? So you want to shade that completely. And that would be our consumer surplus. Okay, so you don't need to calculate or anything. You just need to shade it completely there. All right, let's move on to part B. Suppose the demand for the prescription drug increases and Gigantic hires its warehouse workers in a, this is important, perfectly competitive labor market. Okay, so we've got a couple things going on. Part 1 here, what will happen to Gigantic's demand for warehouse workers, and then explain. Okay, well, this is a derived demand, right? So presumably what's going on in this market here is going to affect how many warehouse workers a Gigantic company is going to demand, right? So first of all, the first part, what happens? Suppose the demand for the prescription drug increases, right? So that's sort of a shift outward in this demand curve here. If we were to, you know, we don't have to redraw it here, but let's just quickly think through the thought experiment. Well, what's going to happen? Well, you know, we could still maximize profits where MR equals MC, and presumably that hasn't changed, right, due to a demand shift. So the only thing that changes is the demand curve is going to be higher somewhere up above. So when we come to find the demand curve, right, price is going to be higher. So really, essentially nothing has changed other than that this monopoly company is able to charge a higher price. Okay, so what will happen to their demand for warehouse workers? Well, they are, so this is going to increase. And this is important. How do you explain that? Well, we already talked through greater demand is going to lead to a greater increased price. So the key thing you want to talk about here is that the marginal revenue product of labor increases, right? So marginal revenue product of labor is the marginal product of labor times the price. It's a measure of how much revenue that last additional worker brings in. And as the price of whatever you're talking about changes, so we talked about it increasing, that's going to change your marginal revenue product columns, right? So if each worker is now contributing a higher marginal revenue product value, it stands to reason that you're going to hire a few more workers. Okay, so that should be some explanation, sort of tying those together, a sentence or two should be good. Okay, and then part two, that's why this is important, right? What will happen to the wage rate Gigantic pays its warehouse workers? Because it's a perfectly competitive market, no change, right? In a perfectly competitive market, people are price takers, right? So in this case, it's essentially both the workers and the employer, right? The wage is sort of set in the market, and then everybody takes that as a given, right? Price takers is a key component of perfectly competitive market. So no change in the price, or the price being the wage, and the number will increase, and that's because of what's going on up here, right? If everybody's marginal revenue product increased, but the wage rate stayed the same, they're going to hire a few more workers, right? So no change to the wage rate, but the number of workers will increase. All right, so let's go to part C now. After Gigantic's patent expires, another firm enters the prescription drug market and produces an identical drug that sells for a lower price. What will happen to Gigantic's producer surplus? And then the part two is what will happen to the consumer surplus in this prescription drug market. So we can kind of think about, use sort of the same graph here and think through. I'm going to actually go ahead and highlight our initial producer surplus, so we can think about it from that perspective and try and think about what's going on as the demand shifts. So the initial, let's go back to our initial graph here. In monopoly, there is no supply curve, right? So think of the marginal cost curve as the supply curve. Extend that a little bit further. So the area of producer surplus is the area above the marginal cost curve, up into the price and to the quantity, right? So it's this sort of oddly shaped area here, right? And again, we don't have to calculate anything in here. They're just asking, hey, is it going to increase, decrease, stay the same? So you take the area above the marginal cost, go all the way to the price and to the quantity. Now, what's going on here? We have another firm entering the drug market, so we got to think about what's going to happen. Again, in the same way we thought about it in part B, right? That was an increase in demand. Well, if we have another competitor, and not only that, but they're charging a lower price, we're going to lose some customers to them, right? So that's represented by a shift leftward in demand. Okay, so think about, in the same way in part B, we thought about demand moving rightward. Now we're going to think about demand moving leftward, inward, right? We're going to lose to our competitor. So what's that going to do to our areas here, right? Well, when the demand increased, right, that led to a price increase. Now, if demand is shifting the other way, price is going to decrease, right? And that makes sense intuitively with more competition. But take a look at our what they're asking here about producer surplus and then consumer surplus. If the price is coming downward, right, this area, the red area, which is our producer surplus, let's label that, producer surplus is shrinking, right? It makes sense because the price is coming sort of down this way. And conversely, consumer surplus is increasing, right? So producer surplus is decreasing. And they, interestingly, they don't ask for an explanation here. But part two, they do ask for an explanation, right? Explain. So you got a little bit more information. So we can intuitively kind of see what's going on there. But now they want to ask about what's going on with the consumer surplus. And then they want us to explain. So we kind of can see, okay, well, as producer surplus is shrinking, consumer surplus is increasing due to this new company entering the market and increased competition. So the important thing to do to explain this is to say that price is decreasing, right? And that makes sense. As price decreases and you're on a downward sloping demand curve, that the area of the consumer surplus would be increasing. And the other thing you can say about this is that quantity consumed is increasing, right? So as price decreases, when you come over to a demand curve, the quantity is going to increase as well. So both of those things are going to serve to expand the size of this area of this consumer surplus triangle. So some explanation, a sentence or two, integrating these observations, I think is enough for this question.